I too welcome Maureen O'Sullivan's bill, and I don't think she's asking too much. Really, what it amounts to is that she thinks that it's wrong that we tolerate cruelty towards animals. And the truth of the matter is that the vast majority of Irish people don't agree with any kind of cruelty to animals, but the truth also is that we're probably not really doing enough to address it where it does happen. The Animal Health and Welfare Act, which did come into force in 2014, it did mark a significant step forward in animal welfare in Ireland, and Minister Coveney at the time was certainly praised for his efforts and his openness to amendments and general patience, and there was a lot of work went into it. But at the time, I remember the Minister was also criticised for the failure to deal with animal cruelty around hare coursing, digging out foxes, the use of traps in badger culling and fur farms, which Maureen has already highlighted tonight. The legislation empowered authorised officers to enter property, examine animals and even to seize animals or other evidence when appropriate. It enabled authorised officers to deal with issues far more effectively than before. However, huge problems still exist with the enforcement of the legislation, and as Maureen said back then, that the proof of the pudding will be the implementation of codes of practice and the resources provided. We need to see enforcement of our animal welfare laws, and if necessary, if this is what it takes, there will have to be more severe punishment from the courts for those convicted of cruelty to animals. Lack of enforcement is a problem, and the ISPCA argue that penalties imposed have not been particularly high and do not serve as a deterrence, and that, generally speaking, penalties imposed have been at the lower end of the scale. Enforcement of many aspects of the legislation is dependent on ISPCA inspectors. They have a team of 8 uniformed inspectors who currently cover 17 counties, so half the country is not covered. In 2016, following a submission to the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture, the committee recommended that, given the ISPCA's service agreement with the Minister, they should be given more funding to allow recruitment of enough inspectors to cover the whole of the country. This is yet to happen. Similarly, National Parks and Wildlife Service rangers go to hare coursing events and report on them. But as Maureen pointed out, there is no monitoring of coursing trials, which are organised prior to official hare coursing fixtures to test the performance of the greyhounds, and there is live hares used at these events. Animal welfare sanctuary volunteers and managers repeatedly say the legislation has simply not been acted upon. In relation to Dog Breeding Establishment Act 2010, the ISPCA have said that there is a lack of enforcement, guidelines not being met, and there is widespread non-compliance. Animal shelters across the country are overworked, underfunded, and are hugely exasperated with the government's failure to deal with mandatory microchipping. Maureen also touched on greyhounds, an issue we've raised here over the last few years, especially around the abuses around drugs, and sadly it is the bigger players that are involved in it. Now, there has been some improvements made, but I think a lot more work still has to be done for us to clean up the industry. I don't have an awful lot of time. I just want to touch on there was a protest last week against the export of live cattle, and I managed to get a bit of notoriety from the farming sector for actually even attending it. But I think most people actually acknowledge that travel time on the ships is too long. It's not natural. We're sending cattle outside of the EU, where EU rules in terms of how the cattle are being dealt with or how they're killed no longer apply. And I'm wondering, is the government doing anything about it? Surely, even from an economic point of view, we should be processing more at home, and we should stop the export of live cattle. Now, I do understand part of the problem. I know that a lot of the cattle that go come from the dairy herd. Dairy farmers, they're using Holstein bulls to try and produce heifers for dairy. They end up with a product with a whole lot of bulls that are not attractive to the meat industry. I'm just wondering, has, for example, as an alternative, would they consider targeting the cows that would produce the Holstein heifer for milk through the AI, the artificial insemination, and use the likes of Aberdeen Angus bulls, redheads, and with the rest of the herd, so that we will actually have a good beef product coming in the other area.
Thank you, Deputy.
Obviously, a little bit of work in it, but I think it's something the government should consider.